one of the other things mentioned quite frequently in the literature of mobility is actually the various impacts on our perception of, or conception of, time. So, for example, some phrases come up quite frequently, and I guess I'm indebted, for example, to Rich Ling and Sadie Plant for some of these. They talk about micro-coordination, for example, how the nearer you get to an event, an appointment, a meeting, whatever it is, the more closely you can coordinate it because you're in touch with any of the other potential participants. So you can actually start with something fairly loosely defined. We'll meet next week. Then on Monday we'll say, okay, how about Wednesday? Then as it gets nearer we'll say, okay, 11 o'clock. And you can also renegotiate those in the sense of, if you're stuck in traffic, you can start saying, oh, sorry, I'll be 10 minutes late, giving someone else the opportunity to fit another appointment in. And you can actually, if you find ways of monitoring this, you can watch the ripples of this spread through a community, how they're all renegotiating their schedule. And so, again, in the words of Christoph Mareri, time becomes personal. It becomes socially negotiated. We're no longer governed by a kind of industrial Newtonian absolute time. We're governed by the temporal relationships to other people we live with, work with, communicate with. And I think that kind of dilutes our sense of time, and I think other things do that as well. Increasingly, we're connected to other people around the world. So I, for example, know, I don't know, when an editor or a publisher is waking up in Melbourne, and I know when colleagues, well, I know David Metcalf, for example, are clocking off in Florida. And so I'm not just here where I am, I'm kind of mentally there as well, thinking along the rhythms of their working day. And when I'm traveling, I'm thinking about my family back home, and so I'm conscious when they're getting up and going to bed, even though it's completely out of sync with when I'm getting up and going to bed. I think other things have similar effects, reinforce that. Rich Ling talks about the fact that everyone in Norway 20 years ago used to watch the 9 o'clock news, and the phrase he uses, it gave them a kind of ontological security. They knew where they were. They were all sat round watching national television, and it gives them a kind of solidity, a cohesion, and it resonates with my experience of kind of being at school maybe 40-something years ago, where we would all arrive and talk about watching Monty Python the previous evening. Well, nowadays we have video on demand, we have recorded digital TV, we have 58 different digital channels. There's no way I'm going to come in the morning with any assurance at all that I have that kind of connection with anyone at all that I might meet. We also have, of course, rolling TV news. So again, there's not that kind of landmark in the day for us to fix ourselves around. And I think someone had noticed that the remarks I quoted about the process of pre-visiting. You can kind of be places before you've been there. You know, you can go on Google Earth. You can go on a virtual tour. You know, so if you're going on a holiday, you can check out the hotel. You can check out the sites. You can check out the route. You can drive along the route. Not only that, but with your video camera, you can look back on it all as well. You can replay the experience, and actually with Flickr and all sorts of other things, you can replay other people's experience. So the kind of immediacy of being here and now gets diluted by these technologies. I quoted a personal example at a talk once that said actually you could almost, using sat-nav, drive to the sat-nav rather than looking at the road. It works fairly well. You can kind of see around the bend for up to about 50 meters, as long as no one steps into the road. So okay, I think one of the effects on of mobile technologies is the way in which they dilute a sense of the here and now. And if you take my remarks to the extreme, then I kind of worry that so-called augmented reality is actually diluted and distracted reality. We're not here now. We're just loads of other places at loads of other times, and and maybe that's just the kind of temporal spatial equivalent of multitasking. We're in lots of other spaces and times and places, as well as the one where we think we actually are. Okay. I did make some remarks in various places about identity, and that was originally what originally made me think about that was hearing someone from Nokia 5 years ago talking about within Nokia they refer to mobile phones as our new private parts, something kind of intimate, personal. We've all got them, something that has become part of our identity. And if you follow through the literature, you can see various ways of expressing that. You can see some people talking about mobile phones becoming embodied. You can see people talking about them becoming prosthetic. All of a sudden, our identity incorporates our mobile phone to such an extent that a young girl quoted in a UK newspaper said she'd rather part with her kidneys than her mobile phone. And she didn't understand how social interactions took place before the mobile phone. Did people actually go around and meet each other, she asked? Did they get on their bike? So yeah, she of course realised she had 2 kidneys and only 1 mobile phone, so she wasn't being quite so naive. She's prepared to let go 1 kidney, but not both. But you can see the way in which these things have become part of us, and you can see it in various different ways. I've got a slide of taken from the Registry of Births and Deaths and so on from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, showing how many kids have had names registered to them by their parents that are mobile phone related. They are really extraordinary things like missed call and connect and so on. Let me see, can I find them? Yeah, talk time, scratch card, SIM card, voicemail, call me later, Vodacom. There are kids in KwaZulu-Natal who've all got those as their given names, which I find extraordinary. So we see these things becoming part of us. And again, even if only at a trivial level, that's got to have implications for education. I mean, if the only response of the education system, especially the school sector, to mobile phones is to confiscate them, then I think they should see that in a rather different light, having considered, you know, the place that these technologies take in people's lives. Excuse me, I'm just collecting a few more thoughts. There is the business of appropriation, and how does that relate? Okay, how does that relate? Well, I suppose a classic example of appropriation is technology in education, where we've seen the educational system appropriate business technology, IBM, International Business Machines. The laptops and the desktops that we have used for the last 25, 30 years weren't developed for us in education. They were developed for businesses, for corporations. And what we've done is appropriate them. And we've done it fairly well, actually. And that's not surprising, of course, because they were developed for corporations, and most educational institutions are themselves corporations. What I think is challenging and problematic is that we're now thinking about using them for education. We're now thinking about using mobiles for education. And the nature of that appropriation is going to be rather different, because they're not a technology intended for large organizations that can be deployed in the ways that large organizations deploy them. We're talking about appropriating a technology which is personal, that is intended for all sorts of different markets, niche markets, leisure markets, lifestyle markets. And it's not going to be an easy process for those reasons, working out how to appropriate and exploit mobile technologies for learning. Especially as, I suppose, if we want a sustainable version of mobile learning, that's the very thing we're going to have to do. You know, sadly, I think what we've proved in mobile learning over the last 10 years is actually education improves if you buy people some technology and let them use it. I think we probably could have guessed that. Yes, if you spend money on education, education gets better. Sadly, we're now needing to look at a version of education where we can't spend the money, and the only way we can do that is to negotiate with our learners how we can use the technology they own, that they bought and they chose. So I'm talking about how can we appropriate their technology rather than a corporate technology, and that's really, really challenging, I think, and at many, many different levels. You know, we used to stipulate the conditions on which our students could use the technology we provided. Now we're going to have to try and stipulate the conditions on which we can use the technology that they provide. It's not easy. They pay for the network, quite possibly. They certainly paid for the gadget. They chose the gadget and it expresses their personality and diversity. This could be a whole new ball game if it's to be successful. So there's a lot of stuff about how mobiles are increasingly part of people's identity, and how I think that is problematic for a sustainable version of mobile learning, but actually challenging anyway for any educational system which wants to recognize the changed sense of identity which people now have. Okay, a couple of closing remarks, I think. I've almost run out of things to say. Goodness. What else is there? Yeah, it's very easy to portray mobiles as giving us limitless mobility. And people have made the comparison with mobiles and the motor car. The two are icons of the 20th century that allow us to go anywhere and do anything. And actually, you can see the parallels. Yeah, certainly on the upside, they do allow us, we think, to go lots of places we couldn't go to, and to take education to lots of places we couldn't get to. But if you look at the motor car, certainly in, for example, London, the mobility they give you is severely constrained. You spend most of your time looking for parking spaces, worrying about servicing it, trying to find a petrol station, crawling along at 5 miles an hour, and in central London paying quite a lot for the privilege of doing so. And it's actually equally true of mobile phones. They kind of reconfigure mobility, but it's not free and it's not limitless. You have to worry about airtime, connectivity, tariffs, charges, battery life, screen visibility, all sorts of things actually constrain what you thought was the limitless mobility that the mobile would give you. And you see people now using physical spaces, for example, within education or conferences or lectures in ways that are not the way they used to occupy those spaces before. They sit near the PowerPoints, or they worry about the lighting level. So yeah, we should watch it. It's not mobility for free. It's just a reconfigured version of moving around. Also, my friend and colleague Agnes Górska-Hume has a slide that portrays what we call the moorings or the tetherings of mobile learning in a slightly different way. You think of the mobile as the discrete gadget, maybe the discrete gadget that's becoming part of you, but actually if you open the box, what's in there is loads of wires, CDs that you have to put in your laptop, all sorts of different kind of gadgets and gizmos that actually are part of the clutter of being a mobile person. And as soon as you leave them behind or forget them, your charging cable, your syncing cable, the transformer or whatever, you realize again it's not quite as mobile and it's not for free in the way you thought it was. So I think we need to bear that in mind. So that's one warning. I've got a slide that I took outside a public lavatory in London, where because the base stations are so close together, you just SMS the word toilet to a particular number and it will tell you where the nearest public toilet is, because there's more base stations in central London than there are public toilets, so it's actually technically quite easy. But the downside of that is the extent to which we all have an increasing sense of surveillance. And in the UK, we're famous for having our pictures taken by CCTV 300 times a day. If you add that to the sense in which mobiles know where you are, can find where you are, again, that's a downside. And there are, reportage every now and again of how iPhones are tracking us and everyone else is tracking us that reinforce that sense of ill-ease, if you like. And in talking about ill-ease or unease as a resonance with many of the postmodern philosophers, with Foucault, for example, and his references to the panopticon, how the sense of being watched and followed creeps into your soul. The point being, actually, that, yeah, we can use this technology, we can have as much technology as we like, we can use it to deliver learning to as many people as we like, but we're not in a closed box, and there's other stuff going on in our societies, other stuff where possibly people with little learning and little technology are still enormously powerful and enormously dominant, significant, and not necessarily always benign. So yeah, that's another take-home point. I think, having now talked to an empty box for how long? Goodness, 43 minutes.